Hello everybody, I'm Jeff Maloney. I manage product marketing for CA, and welcome to this session. This is going to be a great session. It is with Matt Morgan from UnitedHealth Group, who just won the Impact Award in our Agile Management Theater. And a big reason why Matt won the Impact Award is because he's a practitioner in our PPM industry. He has a lot of expertise and he does a lot of favors like this so that he can come up and talk to you as customers and prospects on how he manages PPM. And hopefully you can learn a lot of insights on what he does for his company, because if you listen to James and Ryan's session, they talked about meeting you where you're at. And Matt does a great job at meeting his UnitedHealth Group company where they are, understand where they need to be, and helps them become successful in that end goal of running a PPM solution. And a major portion of what Matt has done for UnitedHealth Group is he is almost running at 100% adoption of his systems across his organization, which is very fantastic. And the reason why he does that mostly is because from the top down, he gets the leadership involved in order to get everybody driving behind that one goal of utilizing their particular portion of technology in order to drive the business. So welcome, Matt. Thank you very much for presenting today, and good luck.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. Okay. All right, thank you. So what I'm going to do is rip through some slides pretty quickly. I'm not a fan of sitting here and killing you guys with PowerPoint, so I'm going to go through them, talk about the concepts, and then take questions. Right? We've got a mic right here, so if you got questions, I'll try to leave plenty of time at the end. You can ask questions. I've done this a few times, and that seems to be what everyone says. Just give me an opportunity to ask questions to understand how it relates to what I'm doing. Right? So I'll start off with, what is Optum? Because we'll talk a little bit about Optum. As the Minneapolis newspaper said, I think about a year ago, Optum's the largest technology company no one's ever heard of. Right? So Optum is part of UHG. UHG is basically, United Healthcare and then Optum. Optum's the consulting services, innovation, and technology sits within Optum. So most of our implementation is related to the Optum side of the business, so I just want to make sure everyone knew what that was before I start referencing Optum over and over again, right? As we look at why did we push a PPM system forward, why did we try to do this, right? Optum, UHG, we had 19 PPM systems at one time. I think it was a couple of years ago. We've scaled that back significantly, right? I'm not going to say we're down to one, but we've scaled it back quite a bit. And we were trying to solve a few key objectives, right? The systems that we had were not scalable. They weren't performing very well. We had some really bad response times. The systems were down for maintenance like 18 hours a week. It was ridiculous, right? So we needed to solve for that. We needed to make it easy for people to get information into the system, right? I often tell, and this is a story I've told a lot when we started off on this journey, is that PPM systems are sold to CIOs and SVPs and all of these executives because they want data, they want analytics, they want to understand their organization. And so everyone trying to implement them is implementing them for the CIO. The problem is if you don't implement it for the people who are using the system, you don't get any of that data. You do, but everyone's gaming the system to get off a compliance report, so that way they put some data in there, but it's not real. So we needed to solve for that, right? We needed to make it easy for people to get stuff in there so we could get the right data out of the system. And then we had another system internally that was developed a long time ago. As one of our internal objectives, our CIO came to me and said, I hate this system, make it go away. So that was one of our objectives. It was our whole intake process. How do you ask IT to do something? You went into the system and we needed to get rid of that. So we brought all that into our PPM system, right? So that's what we wanted to achieve. How did we go about doing it, right? First of all, when I say CA PPM, we internally branded it Optum PPM Optics, right? That's our internal brand. We got a whole marketing campaign and everything around it. So I'll reference PPM Optics here. But our implementation's pretty good sized. We got about 22,000 users. We've got mostly in Optum Technology, but we've got a few thousand outside in the business. We are leveraging pretty much all the features and functions of the system. There's a few we don't. There's a few I hate to say customized, but we did customize. But for the most part, we're using basically the whole system, right? We've got it set in our DMZ, so I can grab my phone and get into the system anywhere. I can go to my iPad and get into it anywhere. I don't have to worry about being on the network to do it, right? So that's a huge thing. We needed to do that for acquisitions. As we're buying new companies, you can't wait till you get someone into the network before they can start using your enterprise tools, right? So we did that. We've load tested the crud out of this, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. but we've got about 22,000 concurrent users in our load test environment, and we run that constantly, just to make sure there's no issues, that we can handle the data, the scale, all that stuff. So as our performance expert says, he doesn't think anybody's performance tested CA PPM to the extent that we have, right? And he's not at Optum, he's a consulting organization guy who's an expert at this stuff, right? We do have a live replicated reporting database, so we can pull all the data out of the system live time and not hurt the transactional system. So that's another thing that we did to try to make sure we solved for problems. And we did a lot of custom portlets. John, who's sitting in the back of the room, knows pretty much all of these custom portlets. He's looking around like he doesn't. But there's 309 that we created because we wanted to get people into the system to use the data, use the system, not to go to an external reporting system or something like that. So we wanted to get people traffic into the system. So we really had to do that, right? And then the PeopleSoft integration, many of you guys have done that, but that was just a nice opportunity for us to solve some issues with OBSs there, right? What's the approach we took for deploying this so we could get adoption, right? Because of the size of our organization, we had 351 stakeholders that we had to review all of our designs, review our requirements, make sure we went through and got their buy-off on things. Now, I'll say it's a loose approval, because one of the things that I said early on, actually the first conversation where I got approval from our CFO, CIO, COO, is I said, okay, from this point forward, we have consensus right now that we will no longer have consensus. I don't want it. I'm not asking the organization to approve what I'm doing, because we never can, right? I want to get all the information, we'll decide what we're going to do, and then we'll say, this is what we're doing. If you have a major problem with it, tell me, but I'm not really looking for you to approve this, right? That's one of the things we had to do, otherwise we were just going to get stalled out. We weren't going to be able to move forward at all, right? We did a very iterative approach. I'm not going to say it's agile, but we had a lot of reviews. We were concerned, as I just talked about, that are we delivering the right value at the end of the day? Is this really what the organization wants? So we had a lot of reviews with all these stakeholders to make sure, do they want this? Is this solving their needs? Where do we have problems? And we changed our designs, changed our configurations and some of our development as much as 2 weeks before our actual final release, right? So we're constantly just evolving what we were building out in this, right? We had about 50 people that were dedicated. Their whole job was just to deploy this. Get it out the door, make sure it's set up. We did leverage some consulting organizations, and I have to say, if we didn't, we wouldn't have been successful. We couldn't do this alone, right? For the scale, the knowledge, and everything, right? And we did take change management really seriously, right? We had a dedicated person, their entire job was just to manage changes, change management. And we had 117 change agents, hundreds of people across the organization, might even been 1,000 people across the organization to help set the perception, manage what it is we're trying to do, right? I've seen a lot of projects fail because perception kind of got out of hand, and next thing you know, everyone says, this system's not going to solve anything, I'm not going to use it, right? So we need to keep people excited and jazzed up about it constantly, right? One of the things that we did in order to make sure we were managing that perception is we did change management surveys. So we've got on the left-hand side of the screen, early on in the process, we did some surveys, reached out to a couple thousand people or so and got information back. Do you understand what it is we're trying to do? Have you heard about it? Do you understand how it impacts you? There's a whole list of questions we asked them, right? And as we went through, we realized we're not really solving for this, or what pocket of the organization isn't aware of this. So we did this based on organization and structure, and we have all this data captured around these surveys. So we tweaked our approach, we tweaked our communication, tweaked how we were doing things, right? As I mentioned, we had a whole marketing campaign around how we were doing this with constant communication going out and lunch and learns and all those great things. And on the right-hand side, you can see the surveys that we conducted towards the end, right before we were going out, were much more successful. People were much more understanding of, this is how it impacts me. This is how it applies to my job, right? And so we were able to achieve that, right? You're never going to get 100% buy-in. You're never going to get 100%, awareness, anything like that. But certainly trending in that right direction helped a lot, right? And we use this data to modify and manage how we were delivering the program. Right? When we talk about the release, right? This is a fun subject because everybody I talked to when we were going through this, it ended up becoming this huge problem because I said, we're going big bang. At 22,000 people, one day you're on this system, the next day you're on this one. And everyone said, that's impossible. You're crazy, don't do it. I've done this enough. This is my 4th PPM deployment. I don't want to do that. I hate doing that. There's way too much risk. I don't get any sleep for weeks before that, right? I didn't want to, but we had to, right? So I had lots of conversations with data migration experts and industry experts, and everybody said the same thing. Yeah, you have to do this. You're stuck with it because you can't take features away, you can't scale parts of the business onto it, everyone's got to go. So our release, we did a little dual entry pilot for a while just to make sure, like, okay, is everything okay? And then we went big bang. April 7th, flip the switch, everyone's on it. And you can see 22,000 users, 28,000 projects, because we migrated all the data from the prior systems. So we had a ton of data that had to be transformed and migrated and mapped and all kinds of great stuff. Once again, we had some experts there that did that because we wouldn't have been successful without it, right? We went forward with that release, and up to that point, for 2.5, 3 months prior to that release, we were focused on training. Lots and lots of training. So as I was mentioning to a couple of folks, I spent about 4 months on the road. Now, I picked Southern California as where I was going to travel to constantly, so it was actually quite nice because January through April, it's fantastic, a lot better than Minnesota. But we spent a lot of time on the road. We did 372 on-site instructor-led training classes. We had 38 people, that's all they were doing. It's just training the organization, understanding how do you do this. That was a lot of information we were kind of giving these people, tons and tons. It was kind of information overload, but we tried to hit the key points. What's critical for you to understand to do your job tomorrow, right? So we really focused on that. Lots of virtual sessions, tons of video recording, and I have to say we leveraged the crud out of Kappa. We've got all of our process in Kappa, we've got all these videos in Kappa, we've got everything in Kappa. So if anybody has a problem, you say, did you go to Kappa first? Right? Check that out, make sure it works first. I actually never had formal PPM training myself. When we bought the product, put it into an environment, there was no one to train us, we didn't know anything, so I went to Kappa. And I clicked around and I think I've checked almost everything out in Kappa. Probably could learn a little bit more if I had some real training, but that was enough for me to use the system. Right? So I'm not trying to sell Kappa, but it was big for us. It helped us all quite a bit. We also had leadership support. This was in our actual executives' MBOs, that their teams had to take the training. They had to sign up for it, complete it, all that stuff. We tracked all the completion rates. And every week, I'd sit down with the executive team and say, here's where we're at. And it became a competition. It was really fun, because the chart at the bottom of the screen that you see, it was, Paul versus Donna versus John, these guys saying, well, you're beating us and we got to beat you. And so it really became a game for them to see who could get 100% compliance, right? This is just an early view, right? It's more colorful, pretty up on the screen. We did achieve basically 100% compliance for training, right? Focused on resource management, project management, time entry. We did have some portfolio management training, all that kind of stuff as well. So we broke it up into features and functions, okay? As we look at the demand intake side of things, right? We had to solve that problem. And so this is where I talk a little bit about when we started the journey of deploying PPM, we didn't start with the product. We didn't put it into an environment and say, hey, this is what we're going to deploy. Let's start working on use cases and designs and all that. We actually took a step back and we spent, I think it was about 4 months roughly, and we looked at everything we do as a business. How do we achieve it? And we mapped it out. And there's a gigantic process flow chart that we have, almost the size of that screen. Seriously, about half the size, probably that screen. And the boxes are so small you can hardly read them because there's so much on it. But we had to map out what we do as an organization. Then we had to say, where do we do things that don't make sense, right? We cleaned up those. We've identified 78 process improvements, major process improvements, I should say. We cleaned all those process improvements, worked with the different stakeholders that own those processes to drive those improvements, and then we used that data to figure out how are we going to drive this into the system. Where do we have to tweak our process, or where do we have to tweak the system to support our processes, right? So that's where we started with, and that gave us a really simple demand intake approach. Anybody in the organization can go out to PPM and they can say, I need to ask for work. I need to ask for somebody to do something. So they submit it, it gets routed through this approval logic, and it gets all the approvals, and it gets its funding. It ties our portfolios to our investments, to our programs, to our projects. Everything's tied together, so now I have all the linkage for all that data, right? So we really focused on process first. That's where we spent a lot of our time, right? And then after we got out the door, everyone starts using the system. We didn't step back. We didn't stop. We're still hitting it really hard every single day. Every day there's compliance reports, and I hate to say compliance because it sounds like, we're policing people, but it's compliance reports that are going to some of the leadership team, some of our stakeholders, as well as our change agents, and they're looking at this to understand, are we still adopting the system? Are we still getting better? We have to constantly get better at this. And so we're driving adoption constantly, every single day. Meetings and communications and additional training classes, and John and the rest of the team, they have all these open office hours that they do, so it never stops. We can't just step back and say, hey, we got 98% of people trained, they're using the system, cool, we're done. Nope. We continue to invest in it every single day to make sure we achieve that adoption, right? We also wrote all of these adoption plans, the training plans, into our new hire training. So anybody that comes into the organization is part of the HR process. You go in, you have to get certified, you have to take your training classes, you have to do all this kind of stuff. Right? So just constantly focusing on that. And then as we look at, now that we have adoption, now we've got people into the system, they know how to use it, and it's easy for them to use it, right? I didn't even get into all the things we did in project management to simplify stuff. I don't have enough time for that, but we had to go through and do a lot of that. I got real data. So this is just an example of one of my departments, right? I can see what's the total demand coming in, right? Is it project-based demand? Is it internal administrative demand? Is it operations demand? What's my organization's capacity to achieve this work? Do I have a misalignment? Every department owner has this for every one of their departments, so you can quickly understand now, do I have a problem? Do I not? Do I have extra capacity? Should I be asking other teams if they need help with stuff, right? So I've got real data I can actually use now to understand where we're at, right? This is just one of the custom portlets, I think, that we wrote. Another thing is release alignment. We have release management systems, we have project management systems, we need to bring all that together. So every project, one of the compliance things that goes out on that report on a regular basis, every project has to be aligned to a release, has to have key attributes associated with it, mandatory reporting milestones and release attributes and alignment and all kinds of great stuff. And release maturity kind of goes through a stage, right? Early on your project, you don't really know where you're going. As you get later in the project, if you don't have release commitment from all the different app teams or the different impacted organizations, you can't go out the door. You can't get your change approved, right? And so we have ways to measure that to understand, are we aligned on our projects and our releases? Where do we have problems or gaps? That also then starts to feed into the demand side of it. Because if you don't have alignment on your releases, if a project's not associated to a release yet, a release team's full on capacity and someone reaches out to them and say, oh, we forgot to do that, sorry, but you need to go through the flow, you need to go through the process, we may not have capacity. So now you have to look at, are you pushing out to the next release, whatever it might be. All right, so we do align all that, and I have to make a little plug for the little calendar. It's awesome. It's a little custom calendar that, because we align the releases and the projects, I don't have to do anything, and I have a calendar view of every release going out the door every single day. And all I have to do is click on it, and I can get the information on the project. What's the release? What's it doing? Who's driving the release, right? Just an easy, quick view to see what's happening in the organization. Right? At the end of the day, we talked about, when we started, I should say, we talked about what are the major objectives, right? And so at the end of the day, did we achieve our objectives? How did we achieve some of that stuff, right? Sort of a scale and performance standpoint, these are really hard to read because they're tiny little graphs here. But the top graph, we have about 2,400 concurrent users on Thursdays and Fridays in the system, right? We've got a lot of traffic going through. It's time entry days, right? Thursday and Friday, that's when you got a lot of traffic, right? And so we have, from a performance standpoint, the other graph here shows that almost all transactions are that 1 to 2 second time frame, right? So we're monitoring this constantly. We've got all of our probes and monitoring and all that great stuff set up. I could plug all those tools, but I won't. It allows us to understand, where do we have issues, where do we have gaps, how do we address those different things. But we invested heavily in the infrastructure, in the environments to make sure that we can support this, right? As we talk about reducing the effort on some of those key roles, project managers, resource managers, release managers, it's got to be easy to get the information in there, right? And we're still trying to find ways to make it even easier for people to get stuff into there. But I should stop and say a story I often told when we started off here 2 years ago was, I was doing all these assessments, right? Why do we have bad data in our prior system? And I started meeting with people and interviewing people, and I spent a good 6 months just talking to the entire organization. Why do you guys not want to use the system? What do you do? And I found people put what they have to in the PPM system, the prior one, and then they have Microsoft Project and Excel and Post-it notes all over the place, which is their real work. That's what they really do. We need to bring that together. So it is the standard, it is required that project plans and all are in the system. You can't have an offline project plan, right? If you don't have an offline project plan, if you do, and someone finds out, you're going to be in trouble. Right? I saw one of our VPs was on a call, someone brought up a Microsoft project plan, and he said, so show me this in PPM optics. And they said, well, it's not. He says, okay, put it in PPM optics, then we'll talk. That's it, right? It's got to be in the system because the demand, or I'm sorry, not demand, all the data has to be in the system. If it's not in there, we can't use it for anything, right? And then as we look at simplifying demand intake, I talked about that a little bit. Aligning data with reality is really what I just talked about there, making sure all the data is in there, right? At the end of the day, I would say the most critical things to think about if you're trying to achieve this, you're trying to move forward with this, is, as Jeff mentioned, we had leadership support, right, from the top down. You have to do this, it's in your MBOs, you got to do it, whatever. We invested heavily in change management, and we made sure we focused on our process, right? So if you make sure you hit those three things, that's where I've seen a lot of other organizations struggle quite a bit, right? With that, I think we've got some time for Q&A, so if anybody has questions, would you mind walking up to the mic here so we can just hear you?
Yeah, and we strongly encourage questions, especially if somebody like Matt, who's an expert in our space. So if you can walk up here would be great, but if you don't want to walk up, I can bring this microphone to you, no problem.
Thanks. Mike, you used the word custom a lot, like a lot. Isn't that much more expensive to implement and maintain, and what was the issue with using out-of-the-box functionality?
Yep, so in our organization, we tried not to customize anything. In fact, our going-in approach was no customizations. If it had to be customized, had to go to the steering committee, had to be approved, because I went to the steering committee and said, if you're approving this customization, I need the money to support it, because it does cost money going forward. There were, I think, 6 areas we customized, that's it, right? So we tried to limit it. There are areas we just couldn't get away from it. Because of our scale, because of some of the things that we have for compliance and other areas, financial and whatnot, we had to customize a couple things on timesheets. We had to customize a couple things on the demand intake side of things. But those predominantly where we had to customize stuff, right? But we did try to limit it. I think it was 6 customizations is all it was.
So what about all those custom portlets?
Well, so that's the thing. To me, a custom portlet is a configuration customization, not a, so I draw a distinction. Database triggers, bad. Configuration changes in a portlet is considered custom, but it's not going to break much. It does create problems because if you change something in that portlet going down the road, you wipe away all the default settings everyone's got, and so there's concerns around that, but custom portlets to me are exceptions. They're off to the side. I would assume everyone does custom portlets. Couple questions?
So one of the challenges that we have is integrating our release schedules with our project schedules, and you talked a little bit about having the calendar and linking them up and the reporting that you were doing. Was there a feature in the PPM tool that you were using to do that, or did you create something to pull that data in externally from your release management tracker, if you will, to be able to do that?
We actually require everyone put that into the system. This is the source of truth for all that data. So when a project goes through its initial life cycle, one of the first things that a project manager has to do is say, okay, based on the charter, whatever it is, here's all the organizations impacted. I go ahead and this is a custom area that we did, but they go ahead and they set a few attributes. The system automatically notifies all those organizations that they're impacted, gives them a screen that says, here's what you're impacted by. Go ahead and put in your estimate, put in your proposed release date, put in all this values, and then it brings all that stuff back to the project manager so they can complete their final estimates. They go through their final estimates, they pull all that data together, and then it's a matter of working through the maturity with those different front offices or release managers on, are we now from an unapproved release to a candidate to a approved release, right? So they've got the whole process actually built in the system.
Two-part question.
Yep.
The first one is a lot of customizations. How did you plan to manage the eventuality when you will have to upgrade to the new version that you are not impacted or impacted in the least?
Yep.
That's the first question. Second, I didn't see anywhere mention about change management. Was it implicit inside project management, or you just did not use it?
Yep, so on the upgrade side of it, or the customization side of it, that is a concern, right? Making sure we try to limit customizations so it's supported when we go through the upgrade. We're currently working on an upgrade to 14.2. A tool keeps telling me I need to go to 14.3, but we're working on 14.2 right now. And it is more a little bit more of a cost to do that because of these customizations. We try to document them pretty well. I do have a team of 34 people that support the product. That's what they do. Their whole job is to support the product. They also do adoption, they push training, all kinds of stuff out there. And so we do have to focus on making sure those work, but so far, I have to say, I don't think the customizations have actually created a problem in the upgrade. We have other issues with the upgrade not related to customizations, right? As far as, I think your second part of your question, change management, yep, absolutely, are you focused on change management from an adoption standpoint, or are you talking about technical change management? Project change management, yep. So we did. We had, as I mentioned, a whole marketing campaign, all kinds of change managers, change agents across the organization. Every week there was a communication that went out. There was posters put up. We had, bring in food and people will come. So we brought in lots of food to different conference rooms. People show up. We talk about it. We went to a lot of the different staff meetings across the entire organization to push the message out there. So change management, I would say, between change management and training, we spent more money on that than the purchase of the product, the configuration of the product, the deployment of the project, and the support of the product. It might even be a 2-to-1 ratio on that. Yep.
I missed your first couple slides. Are you guys doing Agile in projects? And if you do, what's the percentage in the portfolio are Agile?
Yeah, so I'm not technically the owner of the Agile space, so I'll give you what I think might be the answer, but don't take this to the bank, right? We do Agile, we have Agile, and then we have non-Agile teams. I don't like using waterfall because not everyone's really waterfall, right? I believe our Agile group is 30 to 40% of our projects. It might be more now. I haven't talked to them recently. And as far as the first couple slides, I did go through our deployment of this product was an iterative approach. I'm not going to say it's purely Agile because I didn't have daily stand-ups. I didn't go through scrums. I didn't have stories, all that stuff. But we had a very iterative approach. We kept coming back, kept reviewing with people, kept showing them what we're doing. Okay? Yes, sir.
When you moved to PPM, and you said you did a lot of working sessions with people, I'm sure that there were groups that you encountered who had particular views on how life should be. And there was an unwillingness to move to the new world and the new life. So what were your strategies that helped you to get these people who would say things that, well, I'll come on board if you do it this way, otherwise I'm not coming on board? How do you deal with them? Because everybody has to do things in a common way with a common tool.
Yep.
So some tips?
Yeah, there's a few ways we dealt with that. First way is we always try to focus, and I kept saying this over and over again, focus on what's in it for them. Why should they think about even doing this? And most of the time we found people just didn't understand enough about it to realize, well, this is actually better, right? There were a few key things that we changed from moving from the old system to the new system. So if they said, well, I don't really want to do this, I would bring up, well, we have no more maintenance windows, so you can get your plan every day. You can do your timesheets via mobile anywhere you want to. So I'd say, you know what, I know you don't like that piece, but look at all this other great stuff I'm giving you, right? So we tried to sell it a little bit there. We then also had leadership support. So from our CIO all the way down, it was, I don't care you're doing this, one of those kind of things. And then I hate to say it, but at the end of the day, you're always going to have naysayers, right? You're always going to. So at some point you say, thank you, appreciate your feedback, we're moving on. Yes?
This is a little bit detailed questions. When you say time entry, do you get your full time and also contractor input the time?
Anybody who is working on a development project in a certain part of our IT organization has to enter time. I don't care if you're a contractor, I don't care if you're an employee, has to be in there because it has to represent the actual demand. We also use this for our whole chargeback model, all of our billing, all of this goes through this.
So you do take that to do the reconciliation of the invoice payment and like that?
Yeah, we go through all that in here. Now this doesn't actually generate the bills. We don't use the billing module, but all the data, all this generates all that in a separate billing system. Yep.
Great. Thank you very much, Matt. We ran out of time, but is it okay if we take a few questions afterwards, sort of off the showroom floor?
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was great. And thank you, everybody.